Hello, this is Brian Ryo with assignment number 8. Assignment number 8 covers the graphics objects. So the first one that's being shown is the graphics object texture. So in the center we have the cube with the texture being applied to it as a graphics object, and the spinning cube is the graphics object color only. Going briefly into the code for texture. It's much the same like color, but instead we also have the projection, view, and world matrices that default to identity just for precautionary reasons. But either in the initialization phase or the update phase, we are able to set the camera matrices, view and projection, and set the world matrix right here. And when it comes time to render in the draw phase, we will call this, and it will send the appropriate information through for the shader to use, and at the very end the actual model gets rendered onto the screen. In the DirectX app, here we set the texture shader. Here we set the texture to be the cube faces. The model is the repeated texture, and right here we declare graphics object 1 as the graphics object, and we also here set the world. And down in the draw cycle, we are able to set the camera matrices and then call render through the graphics object. Moving on to number 2. Number 2 is the graphics object with light. So in the center of the screen you can see the cube, and as it passes through the middle, my spotlight turns it to a slightly whiter color. And again, the standard cube spins around freely. Going briefly through the code, it's much in the same idea. The only difference is that we use the shader color light class that we've created a couple weeks ago, and we have these pass-through functions, so that way the shader can get the appropriate light parameters for the directional point and spotlight. We also have, again, the same ability to give the game object the view and projection, as well as the current eye position of the camera. We also are able to send the world matrix of the object and the ambient, diffuse, and specular for the material. And at the very end, during the render cycle, it sends all those, it sends all that information through to the shader, and then eventually calls render on the model. The DirectX app, again, is quite similar to the one before. Right here we can see we get the camera eye position, we call it through the graphics object, set the world through the graphics object, and render using just the graphics object. Moving on to number 3. Number 3 was combining texture and light into the graphics object. So right here you can see the graphics object getting dark, getting lighter, and getting back up. And again, we have our spinning cube of just regular graphics object color. Once again, this works a lot in the same vein. The only difference is that this time we use the shader color text and light class that we created, again, I believe 2 weeks ago, as well as the color light plus texture class. Again, we created that a few weeks ago, and it works almost identically to the light class. The only difference is that in the DirectX app, we also include the texture to be passed along, and that is given to the graphics object right here. So the graphics object has its shader, its model, and its texture, and through that we can again define the light parameters, and at the very end we set the texture and the shader to context, and we render the object using graphics object 1 render. Currently I have not completed question number 4, which was to implement all these systems for a multi-mesh model, but I'm currently in the works of that. Other than that, that covers this sprint. Thank you very much.